this is all right. If we back up just a second, we realize that this 7th chapter, which is filled with Proverbs, it's not detached, it's not just a group of random sayings, but I think that these points of wisdom are an answer to chapter 6 and verses 11 and 12. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? Who knows what's good for a man in this life? And that picture that question is one the world asked. And it's the question that I think he answers for us in the 7th chapter. Who knows what's good in life? Who knows what's the best way to go? And the answer, in part in chapter 7 is, good name is better. There are points of wisdom to be learned. There is a better way. There are better choices to make. It's better to have a good name built upon a good reputation. It's the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. And if you think about things from the standpoint of the godly, you understand exactly what he meant. The house of mourning is better than the house of birth, because this teaches us about what's real. And it reminds us that this life is temporary. And that's a lesson that the world desperately needs, always has. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than the song of fools. You can spend your life distracting yourself and surrounding yourself with a lot of nonsense, but it's better to hear the truth about yourself and about life. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning. Better is patience. And patience in this life, patience with God, patience with life is a crucial part of wisdom. Don't be hasty in thy spirit to be angry. Don't be the kind of person who thinks that, God just left us down. He's not doing the job anymore like he used to do. I'll tell you, wisdom is good with an inheritance. Money is a defense, but wisdom's better. So here we find a series of points that the wise man makes that show us things that are better in life. There are a lot of folks who try again to muddy the waters and they make it seem as if, there's no right answer, there's no absolute truth. You ever heard that? Somebody ever comes up to you, young people, and makes a point like that. There's no absolute truth. Your problem is that, by the way, Joe, just to let you know, I appreciate you handling all these things. This thing keeps telling me it wants to restart in 2 minutes, and I keep telling it no. And I'm not sure who's going to win this argument. But anyway, that is an argument I'm going. So we may just have to restart the thing we do, and that's okay. We were saying, if someone tries to suggest to you that your problem is you come from such a limited, narrow-minded view, and that really you need to understand there are no absolute truths. A great answer to that is that an absolute truth that you're telling me? And, the inconsistency, the nonsense that's put out as deep thinking in the world today, nothing new about that. And I think in part that's what Solomon is arguing against. He's saying that there is a better way. There is wisdom. There is a higher course. We don't need to be ashamed of that, or act like it's not true. And so the godly can find a better life. Who knows what's good? God knows. That's who knows. And if we follow him, we'll know too. And it's in that context that we find these two expressions. Verse 16, be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. And then you have the corresponding point, be not over much wicked. Now, in reference to the first, we talked about this a little bit last time. Be not righteous over much. Is it possible literally to be too pure, to be too right? Well, obviously not. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, it's just impossible.
Yeah.
For us.
Not literally, so is it?
But we think we are.
Yeah, that's the key. That's a good way to say it. You think you are. And that's the point. And that's what he says in this passage. He explains, I think, himself in this passage. When he says there, there's not a just man upon the earth that does good, verse 20, that does good and sins not. If you think you just don't have any problem, you're above it all, and you're just not looking hard enough. And there are those who act as if they don't have trouble, and that's why they are so impatient and so condescending to other people who are in trouble. That's the kind of spirit he's condemning here. And then he talks in verse 22, and this is again a very modern problem. He said, verse 21, really, take no heed unto all the words that are spoken. Some people have such sensitive hearing. They are such sensitive little creatures. And anytime anybody says anything that they don't think is just as positive as they can be, while they get mad, they're offended. Now you got all kind of row going on. You need to quit listening so carefully. I don't think he's telling us do not be careful with your tongue. I don't think he's encouraging us to be reckless with our speech. But he's saying if you hear someone say something that's not wise, don't be so sensitive in your feelings that you make mountains out of every molehill in life that comes along. You're not going to get along very well that way. We think about Saul as an example. When Saul was appointed first 40 king, that there were those who seemed to doubt him. And the Bible says, one of the translations suggests, that Saul acted as if he were deaf to that matter. Just not going to fight that fight right now. And maybe I haven't proven myself to everybody. You don't have to listen and take to heart and make a mountain out of everything that's said. That's being over-righteous, or a part of it. Another aspect of this in verse 23 Solomon mentions is, don't forget how much you don't know. We get proud of what we know. But Solomon said, I have proved my wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. And that which is far off and exceeding deep, who can find it out? The truly wise man is a man who knows all he doesn't know. He's aware of his limitations. But a fellow who is not aware of that is the over-righteous man. So those are some examples from the text. Now, we go back. He says, be not overmuch wicked. My own thought about why it is that he uses that expression, overmuch wicked, is not, again, to encourage us into thinking that somehow a little wickedness is okay. That's not the message. Here or anywhere else. The Lord calls us to be sanctified, to be pure, and make that our ambition. I think it's likely, just simply said in contrast. He talked about over-righteous, and so to match that, he talks about being over-wicked. It is simple to be over-wicked. You can condemn that without encouraging a little wickedness. But he talks about people who, on the other hand, just go to the extreme of abandoning license, or abandoning, I should say, restraint, and giving license to everything they do. Let's put it in more modern terms. If it feels good, do it. That's how modern this point is. And what's Solomon say about the guy who lives that way?
His life would be cut short.
Yeah, that's right. But that has a tendency to cut down on your time on earth when you do that. When you live that way. And I've said it before, it just drives me to distraction. People make heroes out of folks who have been guilty of this very thing, and they learn nothing. And they talk about all these, I don't know why, but one example of that in particular comes with these musicians. In the 1960s, there were people, maybe you thought they were talented or not, we won't debate that point. But they were people who were unrestrained. They were so smart they didn't need the rules. They were given a license, and they died drug addicts at 29 or 27 years old. There were a string of them. And if you were around at that time, or even if you weren't, you likely have heard of all of those folks. And when their names are mentioned today, nobody says, isn't it a shame these people cut their lives short by making such stupid decisions? No, what they say is, oh, great, I want to be like them. Oh, I'm so thankful the Spirit lives on, and all this nonsense. Solomon says, you want to know what's best in life? Don't run through every stop sign God has placed there, because He's placed them there for our good. And you're gonna unnecessarily shorten your life in vanity if you don't. if you do ignore those things and if you don't respect restraint. Wine, women, and song, isn't that what it's about? Solomon, who knew something about women, at least in quantity, said in verse 26, I find more bitter than death the woman rather, whose heart is snares and nets and whose hands are as bands. Whoso pleases God shall escape her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. He talks about the bitterness of relationships, where people really use one another. That's all it is, just agreeing to use one another. And how that here's a man who acquires women like some people acquire collectibles. And after he's got 1,000 of them, what he realizes is how bitter it is. And how frankly he doesn't know the joy that a man has who has one wife. I preached a funeral last week for a fellow. He had been married 66 years. Pretty good number right there, 66 years. And you can't help but think that this old brother here and his wife knew the blessing of God in relationship to marriage a whole lot more than Solomon ever did by experience. Solomon didn't know what they knew, because Solomon gave himself to license, and he thought he was above the rules. And what he found was bitterness. And there are people today, they may not be the king of Israel, but they think if they're just serial philanderers, they just go from one to the other, the more they're really living. And what they find is the bitterness of it all. That the distraction of a moment ultimately brings that sorrow of heart in the long run. Any thoughts or questions you have about this? Yes, sir.
It just reminded me of an experience I had with a family member, cousin. They were young, and they were, her and her two women, young girls. They were drinking, drunk, get into an automobile accident. Her best friend gets killed there. And she's in the hospital, in bad shape, and I go there to see her. And it was just interesting what she said. She said, well, talking about her good friend who died in that automobile accident. She said, well, maybe God just had something better for her. And I said, I was thinking, I didn't say it, maybe I should have, but I was thinking, no, the reason she's dead is because she was drunk.
Yeah.
But people, I hear this a lot, and maybe you do too, people give God credit that he don't deserve. They don't belong to God.
Yeah, that's right. We lie to ourselves, and we try to make something pretty out of something ugly. Yeah, that's very sad. And it's not the last time that's happened, is it?
No.
In this world. Happened today somewhere, I guarantee. Good point. Somebody else had a thought point. Question. So he says, who knows what's better? Who can tell in this crazy world what's better? Well, if you listen to the Lord, you can tell a lot. If you listen to wisdom, you can tell a lot. If you stay away from self-righteousness, that's a blessing. And if you stay away from license and indulgence in sin, that's a blessing. I told you before about the guy, there's a fellow, he has a bookstore downtown. Smart guy, likable fellow. Not a religious man at all. Talked with him just a little bit. And one day we were talking, and he was talking about I don't remember the name of the current event it was, but he said, we just got so many problems in our society because of all the repression, And I mentioned to him, I said, I haven't noticed any repression, sexual repression, So we've had his license for 50 years. We've had a license. We've had everybody tearing down one barrier after another and promoting and proclaiming lack of restraint at every level, everywhere. I haven't noticed any repression lately. I'm sort of lonesome for some repression. I'd like to see some. But people think that's the way to happiness. It never has been. We have this statement in verse 29, and it's sort of a bridge. We have another, I think one more example that he gives here. Lo, this only have I found, that God hath made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions. That's a very interesting passage. God has made man upright. Tell me the Hebrew word here, upright, simply means straight. And we can see how that would maybe be connected with this idea of standing upright, standing straight. But the idea of straightness. God made man straight. And yet what men have done is they have sought out many inventions. You have another word for inventions there. Pardon? Schemes. Somebody else got another one? Devices, schemes. This word, they tell me, in the Hebrew is only used 2 times in the Old Testament. One of them is here, and the other is in a very different context in 2 Chronicles, the 26th chapter. And in 2 Chronicles 26, he's talking about Uzziah, King Uzziah of Judah, his preparation for war. And it talks about all of the implements of war that he acquired and commissioned. Shields, verse 14, and spears and helmets and habergeons and bows and slings to cast on. And he made in Jerusalem engines, the old King James says, invented by cunning men to be on the towers and upon the bulwarks, to shoot arrows and great stones withal. You got another word there, if anybody happens to be there, with the word engines in verse 15. Devices. Machines, really. When we're talking about sometimes people who have a very complicated and devious way, we talk about their machinations. Well, that's just a form of the word machine. You know, you got all these gears and all these different things that leave me bleary-eyed, you know. And you think about a complicated apparatus that somebody developed. That's the word that's used here. God made man straight, upright, and what men have done is they have complicated life with all of their schemes and all their devices, and it's not worked out well. Yes, sir.
Was it Freud that said we were born inherently evil and learned to be good? Or was that
I don't know.
one of the?
I hadn't talked to Freud in years. I don't know. Yeah, that philosophy is around, though, isn't it?
Early psychiatrists.
I suppose that's what some of our Calvinist friends say. We were born totally depraved. Freud could not do that, could he? Wholly incapable of good. That's what Mr. Calvin told me. And it takes a miracle for a man to even have a good thought. This passage does better than that, doesn't it? You make a good point. The idea here is that God made man upright. Well, we're not made wrong. We've chosen wrong. And that's the problem. Very good. I appreciate that point. Anybody else have a thought? Any other fellows here? Yes, sir.
You think when God made man, the simplicity that, everything he did, Garden of Eden, you go back there, how very simple life and everything, and it wasn't, man, it wasn't enough for him. And ever since then, we've been running, you might say, away from God.
Right. And it hadn't worked out very well, has it? So chapter 8, I think, really continues that thought, at least the first few verses here. Who is as the wise man? And who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face to shine, the boldness of his face shall be changed. That goes with, I think, the last verse. I don't know why they stuck the chapter division between those 2 verses. I think the thought follows. In the first place, he had said all of the machinations of men are not an improvement over God's creation. And what he says here in chapter 8, verse 1 is a really wise man, a man who takes hold of wisdom, is a man for whom his face shines and the boldness of his face shall be changed. The word boldness may not be the greatest word there. You have another translation of that? Yes, sir.
Hardness.
Hardness. Yeah.
Sternness.
Sternness. Right. This the idea seems to be that there's a look of belligerence and maybe also a look of a weathered weariness that wisdom can change, that if you yield to God, it can change. I think about the example of Stephen in Acts 7. And it says that while his enemies, with all their contorted hatred, were trying to kill him with their bare hands, upon the face of Stephen, they looked on him, he had the face as it were the face of an angel. And I wondered through the years, what exactly does the face of an angel look like? But I know what it doesn't look like. And I think the picture here is the idea that God can bring a relief to you if you follow his way as opposed to the way of the world. And he gives us another example of that wisdom. I counsel thee to keep the king's commandment, and that in regard to the oath of God. You want to know a better way? Here's another better way. The better way is don't fight the king, but regard the king's commandment in reference to the oath of God. We could certainly find passages in the Bible that lead us back to this principle. That God places certain people in charge. It doesn't mean they're always right, but it means that God's hand is involved in this matter, and our job is, as Paul said, to submit to the powers that be. The Lord would say, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. That's not a popular message sometimes. But I think that's always been the star the Christian has followed, because he recognizes that God is in the picture here. And God may well intend to bring down this power, but he'll do it in his time. My job is to submit as long as it does not conflict with the express will of God. He says in connection with that, verses 3, 4, and 5, he says, be not hasty to go out of his sight. What do you suppose that means? Don't be hasty to go out of the sight of the king. Yes, sir.
It would be similar to what when they rejected the reform, every man to his kin.
Yeah, maybe that kind of just stomp off attitude, this haughty spirit. Don't take a haughty spirit to the king. That's not going to work out well for you. Stand not in an evil thing, which I sort of take to be a stubbornness. Don't have that spirit that says, well, right or wrong, that's what I say and I'll stand by it. Because he does whatever he pleases. And he's going to have to answer to God for that. But you've got to understand, why would you do that? Why would you be so foolish as to do that? Why would you just reach across a saw that's running and do that knowingly? Well, I have the right, I can do that. Well, you can do it, but you won't like it. Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, what doest thou? Well, of course, God will. But I won't. He doesn't answer to me, I answer to him. Whoso keeps the commandments shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. And I think that last expression there, discerns time and judgment, suggests the idea that there's a proper time and a proper place and a proper way. But if you let your temper get a hold of you and forget yourself, it's not going to work out well for you. It's going to be your fault. Later on in this chapter, he's going to talk about some of the failures of the king as well. He has some things to say about that. But at this point, I want you to look at verse 6, if you would. Because to every purpose there is a time and a judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. I think that passage is better translated maybe in other passages. Do you have another rendering of that passage in the fellows here in verse 6?
There is a proper time and procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him.
Yeah, even though a man's trouble may be heavy on him, there's a purpose, a higher purpose. I think he's talking again about providence. You remember back in chapter 3, he taught us that lesson there. that you may see days of gain and days of loss, and days of building and days of destruction. But remember this, that in all of this, even when you see injustice, this is back in 3:16, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, and wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, and iniquity was there. And I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. For there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. And so it is. There's a time, God's time. And his hand is involved in this world. And I don't know his plan from day to day. We just have to learn to trust him. I think that this section, these next few verses, are Solomon's response to that question in part 2. Back at the end of chapter 6. Who knows what's good for a man? We just live in a world of confusion. Well, Solomon said in the first place, there are things we do know about. In the second place, he said, let me tell you, there are some questions that will not be answered in the immediate time of our life. And we're just going to learn to trust him, and we can if we know God. Because to every purpose there is a time and judgment. Providence of God. Therefore, or as the other translation perhaps say, although the misery of man is great upon him. Even if you don't think things are running like they ought to run. And by the way, this is very relevant to right now. Even if you don't think everything's running just like it ought to run, you remember that God is in heaven. Verse 7. He knoweth not what that which shall be. Who can tell him when it shall be, or how it shall be? We're going to have to just come to terms with the fact that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And if we can't live that way, then we are indeed going to have a hard time in life, because it's the nature of this life. Verse 8. There is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit. Neither hath he power in the day of death. There is no discharge in that war. Neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. You know, I don't care. You can live your life and stick out your chin, be as evil as you can be. It's not going to do anything but hasten your death. It's not going to prevent it. He said, here's a fact that godly people realize, that we're in a struggle with death, mortality. And mortality is going to win in the short term. Nobody gets discharged from death. Unless the Lord comes again, all of us are going to face death. We all take our turn. And because we know who God is, we live with that. Now, we have here the other side of this picture. You know, we've been talking about people submitting to the king as a point of wisdom. He said, all this I have seen and applied to my heart unto every work that's done under the sun, that there is a time wherein one man rules over another to his own hurt. You know, sometimes the subject of a king can act so foolishly as to harm himself. He said the king likewise can be foolish. He can rule to his own hurt. And so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity. Verse 10 is a difficult verse to translate, and it's obvious because you read in different translations, it comes out differently. In the Old King James, it seems to be to suggest that here's a man who once sat in a high place, but he was an unworthy man, and he dies, and he is forgotten, which you might think to be bad for him, but actually, if you're a wicked man, you'd sort of rather be forgotten than exposed. But it seems like he never is exposed in this life. And you know, does that ever cross your mind? You see such high-handed corruption in high places, and you think, when is somebody going to have to answer for this? What if the answer is never in this life? And they may die, and they may give them a big funeral and put a big flag up in there, and put everybody's flags in half there, and then it'll all be forgotten. You know, one of the things about reading history, it takes a while before people begin to be in any way objective. But when you begin to read about characters of history, and you read about more the real story of their lives, it's shocking and many times disappointing. And that may be some of what he's talking about here. That's just the way things work in this world. And in verse 11, because sentence against an evil work is not speedily executed, therefore the hearts of the sons of men is fully set to do evil. They fail to execute justice. And their own case of injustice has encouraged more injustice. Somebody says, why shouldn't I steal? Looks like they're getting away with it. Fill my pockets. But here's what Solomon reminds us of. He says, though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, he says, yet surely I know it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. Verse 13. But it shall not be well with the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he fears not before God. I think he has in mind you more than this life when he says that. And that's a good thing that we have to remember. We might sometimes be very aggravated about some unjust situation, whatever it might be. And what he reminds us of is, nothing gets by God. God's going to watch over you. He knows your case. He knows theirs as well. Verse 14, there is a vanity which is done unto the earth, upon the earth, I should say, that there be just men unto whom it happeneth according to the work of the wicked. And again, there be wicked men to whom it happeneth according to the work of the righteous. I said this also is vanity. And then I commended mirth, because a man hath no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry. For that shall abide with him of his labor the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. What is he saying here? I understand what he's saying is this. You can spend your life worrying about all the injustice in this world. Here's what he said. You'll never fix all that. And it will do you no good. You can run yourself crazy and run yourself an early grave if you want to. But that's not really a better way to live. The best thing to do is to trust God to handle those problems. And you to live your life by the wisdom he gives and enjoy the blessings that he gives you. And to recognize that there are some things that are just too big for me to handle. And just recognize that's a part of this life and to not allow yourself to be driven into misery and early grave over it. I applied my heart, verse 16, to know wisdom and to see the business that is done upon the earth. For also there is that neither day nor night seeth sleep with his eyes. There's some people that just drive themselves crazy with this. And then I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Yea, farther, though a wise man think to know it, he shall not be able to find it. So chapter 9, verse 1 finishes the thought. Again, we just placed it right in the middle of the conclusion, the chapter division. 9:1 reads, for all this I consider in my heart, even to declare all this, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. And no man knoweth either love or hatred by all that is before him, or what lies ahead, in other words. We don't know what lies ahead, what's coming, which way the road will turn. But we do know this, that God's in charge. And we have to learn contentment on that basis, not on this life becoming paradise. So let me ask your questions, your thoughts, fellas, about this section. And unless I've totally misunderstood it, to me it seemed like a very relevant passage in the place where we live. Yes, and then
Yeah, just, for us to go about this life and be driven all the time, we would literally drive ourselves crazy, to be driven to want more, to do more, to advance, to chase after the dollar, to chase after advancements, at work, and, you can never be satisfied like that. If we can live that simple life,
Right.
that I think God has laid out before us, trust in Him, live that simple life, you're able to get a good night's sleep every night, because you're not just worrying and things are on your mind, and how am I gonna pay for this, how am I gonna do this, how, these employers, you shouldn't have the weight of the world on you at all times. And I don't think God designed us to be able to deal with that. Just trust in Him and live a simple life, and I think that's where you find true contentment, true joy.
As opposed to the fellow who sits up all night because there's injustice in the world. Well, if we can help something,
We
that's
can't control that.
well, we can't fix the world.
That's right.
We might be able to help this case, and we should. We can certainly control ourselves.
We can do what we can do.
We can do what we can do, and then we leave the rest to Him. This is not a laissez-faire attitude about life. We don't care about what happens. That's not the point. The point is just the realism to say, Solomon says, in this life, you're going to find injustice. That was true 3,000 years ago. It's true today, and if the world stands, 3,000 years from now, so will it be.
No matter what we do, God is in control.
Yeah, and I think the Lord will handle those things in His time. He's working a work I can't see from day to day. I know Him, I know His justice, but I don't know, here's a ruler that comes up, and I might say, why would they be in the position they're in? I don't know, but there's a plan somewhere. I can imagine when Ahab was attacked. He was the king of Israel. He was attacked by foreigners, and God left him in power. The foreigners and those who tried to remove him were not able to do so. Why not? I can imagine some of this. I said, why did God make this? But He had a plan. I don't know the plan. He does. I know Him. And I think that's part of what He's telling us here. No.
Verse 17, I think it sums it up so beautifully. How, I look at like our country, for instance, how we got, all these scientists and all these people trying to find all this stuff out, and they're going to tell us where life came from, and they're going to break through all these things. But God set up barriers. He set up boundaries. There's things we cannot know.
Yeah.
And in the Christian, we're at peace with that. We don't have to, I hope they find some water on the planet somewhere. That'll tell us where it's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And we spend so much effort and money and resources on nothing.
Right. But if you don't have God in you, then you're just groping in the dark. And that's a clear point in Ecclesiastes. And I believe that's true. I don't care how smart you are, and there are a lot of smart people. But when you push God aside, then there's just nothing makes sense, nothing fits together. And there's no real way to enjoy this life. And you certainly have no hope afterward. Yes, sir.
When speaking for myself, I get to fretting about what might be going on. I need to go to Romans chapter 13 and read that chapter. That tells us God's in charge of this. When you do what I told you to do, you're in good shape.
And what it tells us to do is submit, as far as you can. Submit to that. And you change the world. You change the world by letting Christ live in you. And then teach your kids and your grandkids and your neighbor and everybody you get a chance to teach. And that's how Christianity is always. It's changed the world, but it's never been with a sword. Not true Christianity. Never been that way. It's always been in the power of the gospel. The territory of the kingdom of God, as we've said many times, is not a geographical boundary. It's the heart, the human heart. That's where the kingdom resides. It affects everything you do. Yes, Brother Rodney.
When you look through Acts, you see Paul, and Paul has done wrong a number of times through the Romans, and he used his assistantship to get him out of some of those situations. But when he comes before Festus, Felix, and Agrippa, he's not trying to change the system. Hey, look, this don't happen again. He's not concerned about that. The government, you know, God has placed them there. And, his main focus was on trying to teach Agrippa what he must do to be saved. He wasn't trying to change the government. So I won't get wronged again, or people won't be wronged in the system. You know.
Right. What he said is, what I wish above all is you be like me,
Yeah, you know, and he told us, you know, if
Christian.
you know, he didn't even, if it cost him my day, so be it.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't even protest that, you know.
That's,
So, you know, we could, as Christians, I think there's some things we don't need to get into, get involved in.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that our focus needs to be more, trying to teach others and trying to be a good example. And, there's people that are there's other people who can do those things. Well, you know, I think when Paul told Timothy not to get into the affairs of the men, cares of men.
right. What was it he said to the Thessalonians? He said that you study to be quiet.
Yeah.
That's a great word, study there. It's translated in other passages or other translations. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. And you're going to find in the kingdom of God social justice. You're going to find in the kingdom of God love, charity, and all those things. And they should be there, must be there. But the kingdom of God, it works inside out.
Yeah, you can, you know, I've had family members that, just like some of the stuff that's going on in our culture today, and I tell them, and they might not be Christians, I said, you don't need to sit and watch the news at 12, at 5, and 6, and 9, and 10. Just, I said, it runs you crazy if you think, you know, they're gonna think this picture to you. And, I said, you just don't, I'm not saying we shouldn't know what's going on around us, but I'm just saying that I don't think I need to listen to that all the time. It's just kind of depressing, you know. It's not like that.
It's embittering is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous.
They want you to make you think it's just like, oh, the whole world's coming to them.
And there is an agenda behind it. I think that's right. Yes, sir. Brother Perk, you have something? I'm sorry.
No, sir, I was just being quick.
Okay, very good. Someone done.
Do you think this really drives home the point and looks at it in great detail, the just shall live by faith? I mean, if you could sum it up, would you say,
That's a good point. Yeah.
it just really, you know, it not just taking on faith, it really dives into it.
Yeah, that was God's message to Habakkuk, wasn't it? The just shall live by faith. Time's up today, guys. I appreciate it. We're going to pick up, Lord willing. We have a few more classes in Ecclesiastes, and we'll try to finish. We'll pick up next time in chapter 9 and verse 2. Some great lessons that are found in 9 and 10. And so we'll look at those maybe next time. Thanks.